There's actually this one obscure game that I've had a fun time playing on Nintendo 64 and the PS1 that is 40 Winks. It's a Eurocom game, and it's also from GT Interactive. The game was heavily advertised to come to Nintendo 64, but despite there being a Nintendo 64 magazine review of the game was seemingly cancelled but then brought over to the PS1. Okay, that is a strange decision, considering it was already heavily advertised for the thing. I don't know who made the decision to this, but all I can say is that 40 Winks kind of plays like Mario and Banjo, where it's a collect-on game, except you're more like rescuing or whatever. So you need to grab these 4 keys in order to progress through the game, and there's 4 of them in each level. If you miss one, you have to go back. That's how you progress through the game and get to the boss. You also need to rescue these Winks because they're being captured or whatever from the old man, and a guy and a teddy bear looks like Freddy Fazbear if you look at it. So the story isn't like too crazy or anything, so don't go expecting everything. But the game does offer some power-ups in the game where you can become a giant caveman and break through ground objects that has like a way for you to discover some secrets or some sort of way to access certain areas. There's another one where you're like a ninja, and the other one you go like super fast, or sometimes you're this superhero guy and you're shooting up enemies like rockets or whatever too. When the game came to PS1, it got like mixed reviews because of its controls and whatnot, and playing that, I don't really blame them for that, because you can just tell the game was specifically made for Nintendo 64, and it really shows. Now, Pico Interactive will pick up the rights to the game, and they end up making a Kickstarter to bring the game to a physical Nintendo 64 game, and it was a success. It was also followed up by this special controller that they also made out. We were supposed to get a Dreamcast version, but due to it not meeting the goal line in the Kickstarter, it will not come to the Dreamcast, which is pretty sad. If there was enough funds, I'm sure I would have talked about the Dreamcast version as well. But let me tell you what features Nintendo 64 version has that the PS1 does not. Now, the physical version of the game for Nintendo 64 came out in 2019 of all things. You guys can pick it up in the Pico Interactive store, or if you guys have an Evercade, you can play the PS1 version, or maybe just play the PS1 version. It's also on Steam, but the emulation for the PS1 version, out of all things, is not that great from what I've heard, so just get the Nintendo 64 version, and I'll tell you guys why. If you guys have the Nintendo 64 expansion pack on your thing, you can actually mess around with the graphics settings, like you can have high color, or maybe you go medium, or maybe low settings. It also has co-op exclusivity, meaning this is the only version that actually has co-op. The PS1 version does not. Also, the graphics are much better than the PS1 version, obviously. Now, I've also heard that the Game Boy Color version was supposed to be in development, but it never truly, happened because it canceled sometime after that. So, I only heard a little bit of things of the Game Boy Color, but mostly I've played the Nintendo 64 version, and I actually had a blast playing it. So you can attack these enemies, you can race against a witch, which is pointless, because I race against a witch, I thought I would get something by doing it, but you don't. But you go around, you kick enemies' butts, you punch them, you jump on them like a Goomba, and whatever too. There's plenty of levels for you guys to play and explore. Sometimes some of these levels take longer than they should, but you should have enough resources and time to explore, find ways to rescue Winks, or get the keys. Sometimes they're in areas that you may miss, which can be bad, but that's what exploration is. You just gotta go around and you find these keys, and then you fight this boss. It's going to be the bear boss, but it always comes with different forms. Be a spider, it could just be on a machine or something. There's too many things to say about this. You also collect these seeds, or says, how you're sleeping. You know what I mean. So you collect them to refill your health, there's also like these star things, and you gotta collect these cogs. The cog gears, you need them to open certain doors. It's kind of like how Banjo does it. You collect nodes to open doors, except that was only in a hub world. This is in a level. So after playing the Nintendo 64 version, I would end up playing the PS1 version in the Evercade, and it's not as bad as people made it out to be, which is surprisingly, because everyone will always trash on things, and then once you play it, it's like, it's not as bad as you say it is. It's like Battletanks Global Assault on, or whatever, global, you know, the sequel to Battletanks on the PS1 is inferior to the Nintendo 64 version. It's not bad, but the 64 version was better anyway, in any way, shape, or form. Also, I should say that this game has one slogan on the game's cover: Move over Mario. And oh boy, move over Mario, I think 40 Winks should have moved over to another thing, because they didn't do too well. And I should say that after the game came out, like, the reviews weren't that great on PS1, as I previously mentioned. And yeah, I don't think anyone even remembers this game. But considering Pico Interactive brought the game to Nintendo 64 is great. I should mention that a built ROM leak happened online, which is like the Nintendo 64 version was actually finished, but they never released the thing. So I tried doing multiple researches to see why. I can't even find anything. So I don't know. All I can say is that the 64 version is just the way to go, because you can clearly tell that the game was made for the Nintendo 64. It's pretty clear that the game was made with a joystick in mind, but coming to the PS1 using a D-pad, it ain't gonna have it. But thankfully the PS1 version does have joystick in mind, but for anyone that's using a D-pad, it's not gonna work out too great for you. Though it is vibration compatible as well, which I will go on record to say. But again, most of everything is pretty evident that the game is a Nintendo 64 game. The PS1 version is just inferior to play, all because of the features that Nintendo 64 has that PS1 version does not. I mean, it's like me saying Gauntlet Legends, it's inferior on PS1 because it's only 2 players, plus it's more of a total downgrade to what Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast versions, you know, offered. And if this did come out on Dreamcast, like it should have, then I probably would have said the same thing if it had like the same capacities as the Nintendo 64 version. But look, if this game was to get a Dreamcast port, I would have actually talked about this. But considering that it didn't, well, then it's sad that I can't really review the Dreamcast version because nobody made it happen, unfortunately. But it is cool that we finally got a new Nintendo 64 game after all these years. We're supposed to be getting Dragon Sword and Glover 2 on Nintendo 64 at some point, but none of us know when it's going to be finished. But that's the only thing I can say. And I've already talked about Xeno Crisis, which actually gotten a recent Nintendo 64 port, believe it or not. And it actually plays pretty well on there. But let's hope more Nintendo 64 homebrew scenery happens, because I can't wait to actually talk about those things. So, I think you guys will like the game despite the complaints about the PS1 version. But if you guys want the Nintendo 64 version, you guys can get on the Pico Interactive Marketplace, which they actually sell them. And they're also selling the new copies of Glover 1, believe it or not. But anyhow, if you guys like Banjo and like Mario, then go ahead and give this game a check out, because as I previously mentioned, this game has some replay value because you could play as 2 different characters. Each of them have their own different paths in certain levels, so they have their own different places to go. So all I can say is rescue the Winks and get those keys in each of these levels, otherwise you may not progress through the levels enough. Anyways, enjoy.